It's recorded.
All right. All right. Welcome to the championship rounds where we talk about all things boxing, news, and everything in between. You know, with our resident expert, Essex County's own King Amin. What's up, bro?
What's going on, bro?
I'm chilling, man. Long day at work, and I'm still working for free, but it's all good. I'm here with you. We chilling, man. All right. So how you feeling tonight?
I'm good, man. I'm ready to talk boxing. We had a good weekend, so I'm ready to get to it.
Always, we had a great weekend, right? So we're gonna definitely, touch on that in the event for the boxing boys. We obviously going to touch on boxing news. Some of those things kind of overlap. But before we get started, this is championship rounds. Your podcast has been highly anticipated, judging from all the comments on the Instagram page and everything. You're definitely a person seriously that people take seriously in terms of what you got to say about boxing. So just briefly, why don't you kind of introduce yourself, talk about how you got into boxing or being an expert opinion analyst, somebody who matters, and why you felt like it was time to kind of expand your platform.
So basically, this is just this is something, an opportunity to take a passion and expand it a bit. I've always been a fan of boxing. Not too much as a kid training, but definitely as an adult. Definitely for the last 2 years, I've been training myself, and it's a passion of mine. And I started the blog. So this is just a bigger platform. I just kind of want to keep bringing more content and more boxing news. It's almost a lost art in some ways, man, but I want to keep bringing it to the forefront.
Okay. And again, admittedly, I was one of these people pushing you to kind of do that because, you done gave me a lot of, knowledge in terms of breaking down the fights and the technical aspect and all that. So admittedly, I'm a casual fan. So, I'll take this kind of as a learning experience too, because we are going to be, in addition to talking about boxing, we're going to be talking about some of the basics and some of the things that make fighters successful or not. So without further ado, let's kind of get into it. The first article that kind of came across my desk this week is talking about smoker fights, right? They were referencing specifically Warrior Warehouse Fight Club. And we'll talk about, what the article was kind of talking about, but just the basics of it in terms of like what a smoker fight is and why individuals participate in it. Why don't you kind of share that with the audience and kind of talk about that for a second?
Well, a smoker fight is essentially a boxing event that's not necessarily recognized by USA Boxing. What is not is a backyard brawl. It's not what Kimbo Slice came up doing. It's not what you see in the movie Fight Club. It's not people standing around being tough guys. Although you can look at the setup for a tough guy competition, being almost like a basic outline for it. But for a true smoker event, I mean, each guy should be interested in, really becoming a serious boxer. That's why I said, the exhibitions and the tough guy competitions, that's a little bit outside of it because, a smoker event, like I said, is a guy that's been training, might have been on the fringes, might have been a former amateur or a Golden Gloves or a club fighter, as it will. And he's trying to just continue and extend, that art, trying to keep boxing without, in hopes of turning professional or in hopes of just, being recognized as a fighter, a local fighter or a trainer or whatever fancy boxing tickles for that individual. That's really the overall goal, man.
So just a basic question. What are like some of the advantages versus disadvantages for like an experienced versus a novice fighter kind of getting into that type of competition? Because you can still get your ass whooped, whether it's sanctioned or not. You can still get your ass whooped.
Yeah, and Jay, the real thing is, man, you don't want to go in there and get punched around, man. I mean, just something basic is knowing how to keep your guard up, staying on the phone, as it will.
Right.
Jay, these things are important, man, because just fighting somebody, that's a brawl. Boxing is a lot of technique, man, and that doesn't make you the superior person in the combat. But you in a smoker event, you got to expect, because you're fighting under Queensberry rules, you're fighting on traditional boxing rules. So
Right.
whether or not you know how to fight is out the window. So you got to have good footwork. You have to have good cardio, because footwork and cardio are some of the things you might need to rely on, when you are outmatched in the ring. So being in a smoker event, even though it might not be recognized by USA Boxing, your best bet is to come in there prepared like you training like you Floyd. For real.
And I mean, I think that's a good point because, admittedly, we were at one this weekend, right? We'll talk about that at some point for the boxing boys. But I think what's important is how much it actually mirrored like an actual boxing match, right? Like in terms of the time limit. Of course, they have much less rounds, but in terms of like the time limit of the rounds, in terms of the fighters coming out, more mirroring amateurs in terms of the headgear and the protective gear. But in terms of the rules and the referee and all of those things, kind of imitating those conditions of that you would see in the ring. So I think what you're saying is real important, right? Because what we saw this weekend is that it's not a fight, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of technique involved, right? How long have most physical fights that you've seen between two individuals? Most of them don't even last 3 minutes. You know what I mean? So when you're talking about 3 rounds or 12 rounds or 10 rounds, obviously in a smoker fight it's going to be less. What you're saying is important, right? Training as if you were training for a real fight, because we certainly saw, of course, you got to give everybody credit for the effort, you know what I mean? Because it takes a lot to get in there, but we definitely saw a lot of people lose their legs and they win this weekend,
And it's a gradual process, man, because you have to build yourself to that level. And, we talked about it, training for, a good 8 to 10 years, essentially unsupervised or outside of a gym or piecemealing it with technique from a gym. By the time you get to a gym, most of that 10 years, it doesn't matter. It's like taking an associate degree and approaching a bachelor's degree. That 60 credit associate degree, they might throw out a bulk of it and you walk in with 48 credits.
Right.
On route to that bachelor's degree. So it's an education, man. It certainly is an education inside.
So what would you feel like some of the benefits of a experienced fighter? Why would they get in there? Why would they get in there?
The truth is that honestly, I don't know, because depends on how much experience you have. Think about it.
Okay.
You have to have a lot of time to train to be at that level, even at the level for a smoker event, right? You got to be at a certain level and still occupy whatever space you do in your outside life. So, the advantage that you have is time, because you're able to train and prepare, and we talk about, I mentioned before, there's a fighter, Gabriel Martella, out of California. I think he's like a fourth grade teacher, a pre-K teacher.
Okay.
The mentality of that, I mean, he's doing lesson plans and fight plans at the same time,
Right.
And at that point, it's mental. It's mental more than it is physical, because he's found a way to create the time and create the opportunity. And then he clearly, beyond a smoker, this guy's been on ESPN 2 times last year. So the mental part is the biggest part. So why would a guy do it? Your guess is as good as mine, Jay.
Well, I mean, listen, I have a lot of guesses about why would a guy do it, because again, just sitting on the side watching those guys, if you're a fan of like combat or competitive sports and definitely contact sports, you're gonna want to jump in there. I mean, I'm just talking about the competitive nature of it. I'm not minimizing all of the prep and the training. But again, like, I think for some of those, especially the Boxing Boys event we went to this weekend, for some of those guys too, it's about like for a lot of us saying that you got in there and did something, right? Like saying once in a lifetime chance, saying you trained, you dedicated, you dropped the weight, and you got in there. I don't think I even remember who won or lost most of the fights, because it doesn't even really matter at this point. You know what I mean? Because it goes back to the original point. Not most of those people, they weren't professional fighters anyway, so they got in there because they love the sport.
So you know what? To add to that real quick, man, just to that bucket list, self-confidence, weight loss, and also extending perhaps a part of your being that you might not be able to maximize. So maybe you work in an office, but you say, you know what, every 3 months I got to fight. And this, keeps me sane, keeps me balanced, and reminds me of something that I once did or something that I once wanted to do. So, it's cool in that regard.
And just, as a therapist, as a, like kind of as a mental health professional, I have to talk about the benefits in terms of relieving stress, right? When we talk about exercise, when we talk about a good way, a positive way for individuals to relieve themselves of aggression or anger, frustration. And then if we look at nowadays, kind of the environment that we're growing up in with a lot of violence, especially gun violence, any way that we can get, kids to get their aggression out appropriately is a good way, right? And like we push them to martial arts, we push them to wrestling, boxing is the same way. Before you get in the ring and put the paws on somebody, you have to respect the technique and the training. So from that aspect, I agree with you 100%. So right along the lines of that, the second article was the psychology of fighting, right? So they were they were talking about a bunch of different aspects of combat sports, right? But the one that I kind of wanted to get your opinion on is that they were talking about the Anthony Joshua and Parker fight, right? And they were talking about Parker's camp, they released footage of like Anthony Joshua being dropped. And I guess it was all the times that he had ever been dropped in his career. So they were basically talking about how mind games and the psychological impact of boxing in those games, and we know that they're played in a variety of different ways, how that actually impacts the fighters, right? So I just wanted to know what you thought of the article and what you thought about that in particular.
Especially in light of, on my blog on Instagram, check me out at King Amin of Essex.1 on Instagram. I made a post about Deontay Wilder, and we're talking about response to resiliency. For me, a response to adversity.
Right.
And developing resiliency. And so when you look at it, and they talk about Anthony Joshua walking through New York City and him having to deal with somebody saying to him, yo, you let that fat dude knock you out, right? I think about it, and that's like me when I started off pre-med and I had to change my major. I had to call moms and say, yo, I ain't gonna be no pre-med, Somebody may have asked me, I thought you was gonna be a doctor,
Right.
I thought you dated that girl or whatever adversity you may face, I thought you was working over there, people get laid off. I just look at it, and again, it's good to take losses. In the same way, I feel like it's good to be wrong, because then you might learn something. So, as far as I'm concerned, if you don't learn from a loss in the ring, if you're not prepared to bounce back or come back after a loss, I think that says something about, your character and perhaps your mind state, for better or for worse, I think it's a real deep thing, when you talk about the psychology of sports, even when they talk about fighters that think about retiring, they start talking about it. They say, once you say it, your mind starts to give it away in the ring. So you got to have your head on straight, man.
First of all, I thought this article was interesting because they brought up a bunch of different points, right? And at first, when I was reading it, I was like, damn, it's kind of smart because, you might get him to get in his head and get him to doubt himself, right? But when I kept reading through the article and I started thinking about it on, more of like a macro level, I started thinking the opposite, because for individuals who are confident in themselves, we use the word bulletin board material for a reason, right? And for a certain level of athlete who has a certain amount of confidence, you putting together a video like this might just be the motivation they need to knock you right out of that ring, because we're talking about psychology, right? We're talking about, and in this aspect, we're talking about, for lack of a better term, mental toughness, right?
Absolutely.
So the ability to compartmentalize what your mission is in the ring from what all the other noises going on around you. Now think about what we're talking about. We're talking about fighters, right? we're talking about fighters who, if you're at the height of your career, you may have to stand in the middle of Madison Square Garden and focus on one person in front of you and tune out all the people yelling racial slurs from the seats and yelling this and that. So the only reason why I bring all of that up is, yeah, that may work on an inexperienced guy or somebody, you know, but for somebody who's already made it to that level, you're probably wasting your time and your money, because if they've already fought in an arena with thousands of people, you know, they probably have already learned to turn off the television a month before the fight. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But I want to, you know, but it's two sides of it, right? Because, you know, and I'll defer to you on this, but I would say for an individual with less experience, you might be able to get in their head. You know?
And I mean, even I think, you know, experience, Jay. I think we have to put it into context. The experience and resiliency, or the experience in coming back, man, because you look at some fighters and they lose and it doesn't matter. They're back in it. We talked about Danny Garcia moving up to 154 to fight Keith Thurman, right?
Right.
Danny Garcia lost to Sean Porter. He lost to Earl Spence, right? He lost to Keith Thurman. But he keeps fighting. Right? He on Instagram shining.
That was a good fight, though. When he fought Keith Thurman, that was a good fight. I think I watched that in Philly, man. It was a good fight.
You understand? Like, you can come back from a loss. You do realize this, right? Fighters. And I think there are some that have the psychology like, yo, I didn't lose because I went out there and I gave it my all. And if I lost to the better man, then the better man won. And then there are some, and that's the thing, I'm not exactly sure that I understand the psychology of you know, everybody has shame and embarrassment, but to the point of not bouncing back or not showing some level of resiliency. You know what I'm saying?
You know, but that's surprising to me on some level, because boxing is the ultimate gladiator sport, right? It's one of the only sports where you seldom, never see the winner not congratulate the loser. Like you never see, you see it with some people, you know what I mean? But it's tradition. And the reason why I think it's tradition is because, again, it's the ultimate gladiator sport. We've seen basketball players beat the other person and go opposite direction. We've seen football players do that. Boxing is different because of the respect you have for your opponent. You know what I mean? I got a question though, not to kind of, I'm not going to tell you to pick your favorite boxer, but who is somebody that you would say you would hold in very high regard overall? I don't want to say pound for pound, but somebody who you would point to and say technique-wise, effort-wise, in terms of wins and losses, that's the guy.
You know, I think in honor of his recent passing, I think I'm going to go with Marvin Hagler.
Okay. Now, okay. Why you pick Marvin Hagler?
So let's talk about boxing and boxing psychology. You have two different types of mentalities in athletes. We talk about who Marvin Hagler was always associated with. Now that's Ray Leonard, controversial fight. Okay. Jay, growing up, man, you know, me and my brother are two very different individuals, but even, you know, you could pick your favorites. And I was a Hagler fan and he was a Ray Leonard fan.
Okay.
So you could see boxing in that tribal, you know, primal way. You align yourself with the fighter. And Marvin Hagler, he was hard-nosed. He was southpaw. He was rough. He got in there and he banged it out. He was just a tough guy. Sugar Ray Leonard was considered to be, you know, not that he wasn't tough, but he considered to be a flashy boxer, Olympian, you know, that kind of thing, a Ric Flair type, you know. Right. Not that he didn't, you know, earn his keep, but it was just, you don't take anything from another fighter, but you still have your preference. And I think Marvin Hagler always symbolized, I don't want to say the way a fighter should be, but he was flashy in his own way, so much so he changed his legal name to Marvelous Marvin Hagler because he felt that sports writers was not recognizing his skill level. Went on beyond boxing to become a director of what they call spaghetti westerns out in Italy. He's a different kind of guy. When he walked away from boxing, he never looked back. And to be as dominant as he was, to be etched in history, and to be as diverse and you know, a renaissance man in some regards. Marvin Hagler is my kind of guy. The duality, my kind of guy.
Now, the reason why I bring that up is because within that same article, The Psychology of Fighting, they were talking about a concept called the reminiscence bomb, right? And the basic, don't kill me if I get it wrong, but they were basically talking about who people decide is their guy, right? Or the greatest of their generation usually coincides with their teens and 20s and the individuals like height of their career. So, immediately, like for me, even though I was a little younger than teens and 20s, I'm thinking Mike Tyson, right? In terms of my generation, in terms of somebody that you could ask a layperson, like, oh, who's your favorite boxer growing up? Who's the best boxer? And of course, there's loads of individuals you could prop up in there. But if we're talking about popularity, you know why I choose that name, right?
Sure.
So my question is, do you think that reminisce bump when Mike Tyson, is mentioned, is constantly mentioned, do you think that he's a victim of that concept, meaning like he's the most popular name, he was the most famous at that time, so people associate him, or do you think it's somebody else? Do you even agree that it would be him?
No, fame and infamy, allowed Mike Tyson to his name to resonate on a pop culture level. But the truth is, boxing wise, again, truth. For 5 years, he was unbeatable. From 1985 to 1990, he was the best fighter on the planet, hands down. Don't ask anybody. That's it. The other side of that is, you have a fighter like Roy Jones, who we were old enough to watch. And for 10 years, he might have been the best fighter, hands down, ask around. A legitimate 10 years. But like,
when did he lose to Tarver?
I want to say around 2004-ish.
And was that the beginning of the slide, or was it, am I late?
Yep. Well, yeah, because that was then, Glenn Johnson, and then it was just, but really it was when he was going up and down in weight, because he had gone up in weight to fight John Ruiz for the heavyweight title. And then he came right back down, and it just wasn't, he had some slippage there.
But do you think this reminisce bump thing is a real thing? Do you think people do that, or what?
Absolutely. I think some fighters, they're going to get, a certain kudos because it's who that individual can recognize. And that's the important part about doing the history and just digging deep, because it's easy to just stick to the guy you remember. Some people are going to tell you Holyfield because they remember or appreciate his behavior opposite of Mike Tyson.
Mike Tyson, right.
Not that they remember his career, not that they remember the losses to Bo or to Foreman. They're just going to say, oh, he was the guy to fight Mike Tyson. Yeah, that was terrible what Mike Tyson did to him. I like Evander Holyfield.
And everybody is different, right? Because I know a lot of people, not to go on a tangent, but I know a lot of people going to love Evander Holyfield for the fact that he put Philippians 4:13, on his robe. People grabbed onto that. And it was like, yo, this is a guy, who has all of these positive qualities. And then they, how we do as people, we assign certain attributes to that person. He becomes the good guy. And we all know what Mike Tyson was cast as. So along those lines, I agree with you. Definitely agree with you. All right, we're going to switch gears for a second, okay? We always cover basic topics. Like I'm a self-described casual boxing fan, so school is in session. It's time to learn. So we're going to do ABCs of boxing as we always do, and review a basic concept. So a video that we were kind of been talking about over the last couple of days is the video of Roy Jones and Chris Eubanks, right? When they were doing technique, specifically footwork. That's the video you sent me to work on my footwork initially. But I get the concept, right? They were working on head movement. They were working on footwork. So what I kind of want you to talk to the people about is, what goes into having appropriate stance, appropriate footwork, and why do we keep hearing this word or this concept like learning how to dance is essential to it.
We talked about that, when we was down at the event, man. And I think one thing you have to understand about as a fighter or a person that's even going to engage in boxing training is you have to make yourself malleable. You have to make yourself coachable, and you have to let any sort of pretensions go. So, one thing I picked up, and some of the guys, they agree, dancing and fluidity moving your hips and feeling loose. You know, that's where they get the term slick fighters, slick black fighter. You gotta feel like you can move. Rhythmic fighters, you know, timing. You know what I'm saying? You have to feel as though you can move at a moment's notice, and dancing requires that, and also boxing requires that. So when we're talking about the video, the irony of it is that they had kind of like, you know, nowadays music is very melodic, and the song that was on was a very melodic song. And if you watch Roy Jones, you know, first of all, the concept of what he was doing was he established his feet, you know, as per his stance. You know, he's a conventional fighter, and he established his feet about shoulder width apart, proper distance. And he was showing Chris Eubank that you have to keep your feet at the same distance even when you move. And not just moving, you have to keep your head off of a line from your opponent, because when you stand your foundation and you get your base, you're on the line. So you don't
What you mean by that, on the line?
So when I got my guard up and I'm on the phone and I'm protecting myself, the line to me is straight ahead. And if I'm standing in front of my opponent, you know, my head is right on that center line, right in between my guard. So head movement, if you think of what they did was they tied a rope. And what they did was you had to get under it. You had to duck. And that's why the leg strength is important, because not duck, but you got to squat underneath to get your head off that line. Get your head off that line. So what he was showing them, to the rhythm of the song, he was just skipping underneath it, just bouncing, letting his body feel it. And literally, if you feel like that, if you dance like that, you're creating the muscle memory, and you'll be more acclimated and more accustomed to, at a moment's notice, taking your head off that line. So that was, you know, I found myself, when I first saw that video, it made me very comfortable in terms of, you know, getting my boogie on, tying some rope and just getting my boogie. No matter how it looks, no matter how I feel, I'm learning a very important technique, you know? So when you hear about fighters getting caught with a jab, or you just hear about them taking a lot of punches, they can't keep their Triple G. Got to be able to keep his head off a line.
Okay. Just finally, for people that might just be in their garage working out, they want to be Rocky, or they want to be Roy Jones, or whoever. What are some activities you think that you can do to improve, you know, to make sure that your legs is the proper distance, you know, improve that foot speed and the technique in general?
So we're going to build this over time. I'm not going to give it all away to you guys right away, but here's what we're going to do. This first one, I'm going to tell you to get yourself these two things. And if you get it and you keep coming back, I'll show you how to put it all together, right? Get a jump rope. You need a jump rope, right? Jump rope, work yourself up to the cardio capacity where you can get 30 minutes per workout, you know, at least. But work yourself into that. Get you some tape and be able to tape across on any sort of pavement or surface. Usually masking tape is pretty good, or duct tape if you need it. And get that jump rope, and you come back and I'll show you how to put it together. You get that 30 minutes of jump rope and you tape a cross on the ground. And what you do is you just get in your fighting stance. I don't really have enough room to show you, but I promise you guys come back next episode. I'll show you how to get that cross set up, but get that jump rope going.
All right, that's enough. That's enough for right now. Just dipping your toe in the water, that's all. All right, so the last article we're going to talk about today actually comes from the National Institute of Health. They talk about human behaviors associated with dominance in elite and amateur boxing bouts, right? You know, so basically they were just talking about what the analysis that goes into scoring some of these matches, talking about having a 10-point system. The basic areas that they were talking about that they analyzed to score these bouts: movement, clinch, and the amount of punches landed, right? Some of this stuff in this article was very obvious, right? Like they said that most of the winners, the majority of the winners, had the highest punching accuracy, right? Which is like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But what I wanted to kind of ask you about, and the part I kind of felt I thought was interesting, is they were talking about 4 parts going to scoring, right? Number of blows landed, which is obvious, right? Domination, through through your technique, excuse me, competitiveness, and then lack of infringement on the rules, right? So all of those 4 areas make sense to me. But I guess the question I was asking is, like, as a layperson watching, boxing, how does lack of infringement on the rules, how does that weigh into a score other than, not getting a point taken away? That part, and kind of, how do they measure, if one individual is dominating, in terms of technique or over the other,
What
That's
you're
kind of
really
a
talking
little
about, Jay,
confusing.
is a style point. So, for example, Sean Porter does not have a pleasing style. His style is not aesthetically pleasing. Sean Porter is a rough and tumble guy. Think of Van Holyfield in the headbutting, which Mike Tyson will allege precipitated, the biting.
Right.
Were that criteria in terms of what I would call that style point, a lack of infringement upon the rules, Holyfield, Tim Bradley, those guys would not get that point, because you would say not only is he, clinching, but he's butting and kind of making it messy and making it ugly.
Okay.
So he's not allowing for the distance for you to really see whose punch is landing faster, whose punch is landing first, who is closing the distance on his opponent in order to land a punch, Bernard Hopkins, another guy whose style is not aesthetically pleasing. So if they were saying which style is infringing upon the rules, clinching is not against the rules, but, it has to be broken up. So, they would look and say, well, one fighter dictated the pace. He kept his jab and countered it, pretty much 1-2, pop, pop, pop. And the other fighter, you may say, well, you know what? He didn't allow the other fighter to get his jab off because he was clinching, and then he did some good body work in the clinch. And that's good boxing work. It's not pleasing to the eye unless it slows the other guy down. So it's a style point, essentially. But always say this, I'll make it quick. Harold Letterman would always say, if you want to tell who judging the fight, who should you pick? Think about who you'd rather be. Look at the fight and say, which guy would I rather be? As long as you're paying attention to the fight and looking at the punches, pick which guy you'd rather be, and that's who you give the round to.
It's a good point. One thing I would add, and I want your opinion on this, is, like, as I was reading this article, I was thinking, like, one thing became apparent, right? Because I'm a casual fan, right? But what judges look at and what casual fans look at, especially, are totally different, right? Because I was looking at these 4 things: number of blows, domination by technical standards, competitiveness, and lack of infringement on the rules. And I tried to rank which one that I kind of put the most weight on when I weighed like a winner. And I tried to be unbiased. And to be very honest, it's not the number of blows landing, it's competitiveness. It's the fighter that looks more active, How many times you've been in a room with a bunch of people that clearly don't know what they're talking about, right? Because they're telling you somebody winning that ain't winning. You know what I'm saying? How many times we done had that conversation, right? And you be like, yo, ain't none of them punches landed. Or he blocking them, or he rolled the punches rolling off him, right? These is familiar conversations. So I don't know, what do you think about that? Because I think that the judges weigh, the factors that the judges use, or the main factors, I think, are way different than what especially the casual fan looks at.
Jay, that conundrum is, again, going back to, when I mentioned about about Marvin Hagler and Ray Leonard, because that was the difference. Ray Leonard was throwing flash, dash to catch a hole's eye for 30 seconds at the end.
Right.
Was it landing? Maybe, maybe not, but it looked beautiful. Meanwhile, Marvin Hagler seemed to be bulldozing and trying to cut off the ring and close the distance. And the only time Ray Leonard seemed to be able to get outside of that was when he set his intentions on the last 30 seconds of the round. Psychological. That was his plan. He had a plan that no matter how hard Marvin hit him, no matter what Marvin did to him, he would purposely wait to the last 30 seconds because that's all people cared about. And if he got Marvin frustrated enough after that point, which by the 7th, 8th, 9th round, when he began to turn the tide, then he would begin to press the action and begin to walk forward a bit.
Fact. That's a fact. All right, so briefly, I just want your impressions. You know, we was in Fort Myers this weekend for the Boxing Voice event. You know, dope event. What was it? Kid Kelly's boxing gym.
Kelly's boxing gym, yeah, man. North
A
Point.
lot of great matches. I mean, we seen some young boys put on in that ring. You know, and some guys our age, you know, prove that they still got something in the tank too. You know, so I definitely want to extend, you know, a thank you to number one yourself, you know, and those guys, you know, have the Boxing Boys for kind of allowing me to up close and personal to see that. And again, you know, I've always been a casual boxing fan, but I think I realized that this weekend, that it might be a little bit more than that. You know what I mean? But I wanted to give you a chance to kind of briefly talk about the event. I know you already talked about it on Instagram, but if there's anybody you want to shout out from the Boxing Voice or big up for their effort, you know, just give you an opportunity to do that.
Definitely, man. I want to shout out everybody that was there. Shout out to JT from New Orleans. Shout out to Nestor Gibbs. Shout out to Alex Doomday Lioness. Doyen Francis out of Toronto. Shout out to all the fighters, man. Anthony out of Cincinnati. Shout out to Corey Franks. Corey Franks got dog. He fought the tall, dark-skinned dude that was in there. You know what I'm saying?
Listen, that was a fight right there. That was a fight right there. They was going at it. You know what I'm saying? They was going at it. He fought the dude from the gym, right?
Yeah. He put on for Beaumont, Texas. Surefire D out of Dallas, man. He fought that tough Mexican brother, Alex Guillermo.
Oh, yeah. Tough too. Tough kid. Tough too. Listen, man.
Pistoletto. Shout out to Pistoletto. Remember, that was the young gunner that told us he was going to catch a body.
Oh, man, you are, listen, I don't even want to go there because we're going to go off on a tangent. But you know, that's the kid right there. You know, I'm looking out for him. And I don't want to mess up his name, but shout out the youngest Puerto Rican champ that was in the building. You know?
Xander Zayas.
Definitely shout him out.
Out of Connecticut heavyweight.
Right, for showing support, and then definitely, you know, socializing with us, entertaining us. You know, being willing to, you know, sign autographs, take pictures, all of those good things. So listen, before we get out of here, I always, you know, want to give you an opportunity to either point out, you know, a fight to look forward to, you know, or a fighter locally or not locally on the come up.
You know, I think we have the Maurice Hooker-Virgil Ortiz fight coming now. Maurice Hooker just moved up to 147. He lost at 140. I think he lost to Ramirez, the Ramirez guy that was knocking people out, man. But he's fighting against Virgil Ortiz, who people think he's a big deal at 147. But 147, I call the nexus of the boxing universe. The depth of that division is too deep. Virgil Ortiz hasn't really explored much there, but I mean, these guys are at the same level, I believe, although I may give Hooker a little bit of edge. It's going to be an exciting fight. I think they're out in Texas. And everything else, man, you know, I'll make sure that I put it up on the blog, man, and we'll check in, man, and discuss it. Like you said, man, you're definitely a casual fan, but you're definitely open to understanding the depth of the sport, man, and it's, hats off to you, man.
All right, well, listen, man, I definitely appreciate, you know, you're my brother anyway, but I appreciate you letting me along for this ride. You know, and I'm learning with everybody else. Hopefully I can ask the dumb questions for all the casual fans out there, you know?
Word.
So with that being said, my brother, we're going to land this plane, you know? That first round is coming to an end. We're about to bang the bell, and I'm going to see you in round 2.
Salute.
All right, salute, bro.